Guys, welcome back. Another episode of RX Radio. Huge guest, huge, like quite literally. And you might notice it's Monday. What the fuck? I thought RX Radio episodes only came out on Wednesday and Sunday. And if the year was 2023, you'd be right. But we thought no bigger a red carpet we could roll out for our first third episode a week guest, Stan Efferding. Stan is probably actually the first person I remember watching on YouTube. My friend and I, Jerry Prevo, he showed me this video of a guy called the White Rhino. And the video was titled The Strongest Bodybuilder in the World. And it was a video of Stan Efferding training. And at this point, my mind melted. I was like, what am I watching? This doesn't make any sense. Why is this guy so strong and so big? Right. So there's this not beef, but there's like this competition between Johnny Jackson and Stan Efferding, who were both in their own right amazing powerlifters and bodybuilders. And to be able to sit down with Stan, so many years later, and have a chat with him about sort of his evolution. You've never met a smarter, more curious person, period, let alone with a guy so big, his traps block his view of his neighbor's driveway as he backs out of his driveway. That was a really bad way to say that. Stan is fucking massive. That's how big he is. You literally are at a loss for words, and I'm at a loss for analogies for how big Stan is. Stan, huge advocate for health in the bodybuilding space, inventor of the vertical diet, popularizing nutrition and an easy to follow system, not just for the meatheads of the world, but also for the general population. Stan has probably done more for bringing the sort of the hardcore fitness industry into the limelight. The industry owes a tremendous amount of debt of gratitude to Stan, as do I. I hosted a seminar with Pat Davidson in Miami once, and we had a sale, a Shopify sale come through, and I checked on her app, and the name said Stan Efferding. And I was like, certainly this isn't Stan Efferding. And I messaged him, and at this point we hadn't spoken much, if at all. And I was like, excuse me, sir, Mr. Efferding, Rhino Man, sir, did you just buy a ticket to listen to me talk? And he's like, yeah, I've been following you guys for a while. It would seem super interesting. And that absolutely blew my mind. And that's absolutely the type of guy Stan is. Doesn't stop learning. Just a lexicon, a walking encyclopedia of all things health and fitness and strength and aesthetics and nutrition. Can't say enough good things about Stan. And in this episode, you'll see why. So huge shout out to Stan. Thank you so much for coming on, lending us your time, guys. If you enjoy the episode, share it with your friends, share it on IG, tag us, all that fun stuff. We're also on YouTube as well. I think it's on my channel, actually, the Muscle Doc on YouTube. So head there, subscribe, and we'll remove boomers from fitness forever. You can't afford a house and they're telling you to do zone 2 cardio. Please, for the love of God, make it stop. Join the propagandist movement against old people in fitness taking over the podcast space. You know why they can't? Because they have so much free time, because they're retired. You know why you can't? Because you got to work until you're dead to pay off your mortgage that you'll never pay off. Why? Because boomers made it that way. So, put boomers in home and subscribe to RX Radio. Every subscription gets rid of a boomer. So do that, make it happen. Stan, huge shout out for coming on, man. Really appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you soon. Lundy, hit it.
You're tuned in to RX Radio.
Stan Efferding, welcome to the show, man. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, brother.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Out here at Swiss, Columbus, Ohio, the balmy shores of Columbus, Ohio.
Yes.
I never understand why they do it this time of year, but here we are nonetheless. Because you'd have frequented Columbus in March, the Arnolds.
Yeah, I've had some bad winters.
How many years have you been coming to Columbus?
Yeah, I can't even remember how far back it goes. A long time, but sometimes you get hit pretty hard in the winter, that's for sure. My favorite story, I have to tell my favorite story about the Arnold, is I was out here one year and it was snowing like crazy. Eddie was on crutches at the time. Eddie Cohn, pre-hip surgery. And who was it that came out? Now I'm going to tell this story and forget the names of the characters that were in it. It was Hidetada Yamagichi came out. And I had a car and somebody was bringing my car up. And everybody else was standing out front shivering, waiting for Ubers or whatever else. So I told Hide, jump in with me. And it was snowing and he was in a hurry to get to the venue. we left the hotel. And so I'd take off like a bat out of hell, and the back end's kind of fishing around, and Hiday's like this. He's holding on for dear life, and I reach over, I'm like, Hiday, it's going to be okay. And it turns out I took the wrong turn. And so now I got to do a U-turn. So that's an e-brake, right?
Oh, yeah, of course. Of course.
And Hiday's just like this. He couldn't believe it. And so we're heading over to the venue, and somebody sideswipes me.
Oh, Jesus.
Takes a mirror right off my rental car. And by this time, Hiday was just fit to be tied. And so I rolled down my window because the guy sideswiped me. And I said, hey, follow me. We're in a hurry. So I finished the drive, dropped Hiday off at the front door. And he's never forgotten that. He actually lives in Vegas now, owns a gym, and invited me over to train. I remind him every time that I see him.
Can I tell you something? I've rolled down my window at, I don't know, at this point, hundreds of people in my life, and not one of them have ever listened to me. Like, oh, yeah, sure, man. I'm going to follow you. Sounds great. But, like,
he did.
Yeah. Well, yeah, no shit. No, if you told me to literally do anything, I'd be like, yes, sir, right away.
Well, then I got the guy's insurance, and then I put the mirror back on. It was just hanging. Yeah. I put the mirror back on. It was so snowing and so dirty that I took the car back in and returned it to the rental agency. It was scratched all up the side. But they didn't notice, and I never got charged. So the whole thing's
classic. Yeah. The rental cars are actually the fastest car in the world.
Yes.
Yes, if you drive with the e-brake. I love how it's like Hidetada, first Japanese bodybuilder, if I'm not mistaken, Tokyo Drift, but he can't do taking a turn with Stan on the e-brake, just drifting through the back streets.
He was digging in hard. He was like, ah.
Would you have been competing that year?
No. Certainly not in the Arnold. I never made it to that level.
Because it was funny. You first came on my radar. Would have been coming out of high school. And it was the Johnny Jackson.
I hate these stories. They age me so bad.
But I think, that's like the long play segue to what I want to talk about, because they might age you so bad, but the aging doesn't seem to be reaching you somehow. Somehow I'm aging for you in the times in between. Like, you were deemed the world's strongest bodybuilder, but there was a little contention. Yeah. Was it the Johnny Jackson?
Yeah.
Or was it you? What was the early day rivalries like on social media? Because now it's insane. Yeah. But like you guys were the first, I wouldn't say adversarial, but like that was the back and forth of like, no, Johnny's the strongest, or no, he's a better bodybuilder, he's that. Was there any animosity in the early days? Because that level of adversarial, relationship at that scale had never been seen before.
Aside from WWE, never really in
powerlifting.
Certainly not in powerlifting. I don't know we had a very public dispute like that. And of course that was right at the beginning of YouTube. And Mark Bell was just launching all of his content way back then. It was kind of for powerlifting, it was kind of the most visible venue was kind of Mark Bell. And to this day, he's still very prolific that way. He posts on almost a daily basis. But those were some of the first videos, I think, that a lot of people saw that were shot. And, of course, subsequent to that, a lot of powerlifters in their basement and, lifting. And I think it kind of brought the community together. Fortunately, because of the IFBB Pro thing and the coverage in Muscular Development and Flex Magazine, it reached a lot larger audience. And I think that as a result, maybe a lot of powerlifters saw that hybrid of actually having a six-pack and being strong. So all of that kind of evolved during that time. And it's now been taken to such a whole nother level. I mean, there's just freaks out there left and right. I can't even keep track anymore that are doing things that we never even imagined.
When you first started in the social media space, it was kind of the inception of social media and fitness and the integration of the two. Was there any reluctancy? Like, we're at a conference, there's a lot of coaches here, and social media has become a mainstay, right? Like a constant in coaching in the fitness world. Like it's how you kind of gain cachet. When the camera started being in your face and videos started to go up and people started to comment and leave their opinions, which they only otherwise would be able to do if they told it to your face. Like, was there any hesitation in like kind of going into this endeavor?
I never thought about it then. I never imagined it would have the reach that it's had. And now, all these many years later, I still run into people all over the world. I've been in 14 countries in all 50 states. I've done over 200 seminars, and I bump into people at airports. And some of it's because of Shark Tank, of course. That was in 10 million homes. And they aired that for like 4 years, a few times a year in replays. But Specifically with the bodybuilding and powerlifting stuff, I'm just shocked how many gyms I can go into, and they're like, "Oh, Rhino." And I never imagined at the time that it would have that kind of reach, and so I didn't have any reservation. I just thought it was something that was sort of isolated amongst our little weird community of lifters. But in retrospect, I think it's fantastic. I mean, in so much as we have the opportunity to provide good information, and that because of that, I take that whole influencer thing as quite a big responsibility, and it made me get smarter about kind of the information that I delivered. Initially, it was just for fun, and then it became educational after a while. And so I actually had to go back to school and then get my CSCS, because I graduated in exercise science back in the late 80s. And things have evolved. They've changed quite a bit. And I see that even now in social media. I've watched, as we were just discussing, certain high-profile, popular people have an evolution of their own. Things they used to believe 5, 7, 8 years ago, and to where they've landed now as a result of having access to so much really high-quality information. Highly academically credentialed individuals who are also competitive athletes and commit all of their resources and knowledge into that endeavor. And we just get to sit back here and spoon it in, but for the distractions, in which there's a lot of those.
What was the tipping point for you when you went from, I don't know what this is going to be, I don't really care, camera, no camera, I'm just going to do my thing, to like, oh, no, there's like influence has reached level of impact. People are listening to me at a broad scale. I need to kind of not straighten up and fly right, but maybe like provide value and be a net positive. What was like, was it a number? Was it like an interaction? What was the thing that you're like, oh, I'm going to change this?
I never thought of it until this very moment, but I guess that turning point would be my Iceland seminar with Hafthor Bjornsson, which turned out to get almost 7 million views. And to me at the time, that was huge. I had been training a number of athletes since personally retiring, or whatever you call it, from competing when I was, say, 45 back in 2014 or thereabouts. And then when I started working with Hafthor in particular, because he was such a well-known athlete, he invited me up to Iceland, and I did a seminar. And that Iceland seminar that's still on YouTube became hugely popular. That's when I got inundated with emails and DMs and all the people asking about that information. And so I had compiled everything that I felt I wanted my clients to know, from sleep to hydration to nutrition to blood testing to injury prevention and recovery, and the list goes on and on and on. And I created the vertical diet really as an answer to all those questions, everything that people had asked me over the years. And you know how it is now. I mean, I get 50 to 100 DMs a day sometimes. I've responded to probably over 100,000 DMs in just the last 5 years. I'm pretty good about trying to get back to people, at least with a few words or a reference or a copy paste of an article or so that was probably the tipping point for me when I was like, wow, people really are tuned in and they really do want information, as opposed to just being entertained.
Right now, like you kind of mentioned that you're a consumer as much as a creator in a certain sense, like looking around at the industry, looking at, I'm remiss to use the word contemporaries, because like I think you fit a unique space of, understanding the academic side, but having, I would go as far to say an unmatched experience in the application of the knowledge, right? Like I've noticed of late, and I talked about this the other day, the pendulum swing in the last 10 years of influence, going from shreds, supplements, photoshopping, whatever, and like the guy with the six-pack being the guy with the greatest amount of pull, as far as swaying the public's preferences in exercise and diet and whatever. Now it's like the pendulum is swung to like almost demonizing the experiential side, the bro science, if you will. And, out come the lab coats and the parents start showing up. You're like, who the fuck elected these guys?
Right.
How do you reconcile that with most of the contemporaries now being hyper academic with no experience?
You're very astute. It's interesting that you said that. Some years ago, probably 7+ years ago, I anticipated that trend. And I was the bro science guy. Although I had a science degree and certainly a lot of experience, I felt as though I needed to update that experience. Hence, my decision to go back to school to study, to get my CSCS, and then to just start tuning into some of those lab coats. Some of those are good sources of information. It was probably Lane Norton was one of the first people I watched when he started doing his Fuckery Fridays. And I thought to myself many years ago, I don't want to be on Fuckery Fridays. And that's, say what you want about Lane, sometimes the messenger gets blamed for the message. Some people don't appreciate, kind of how it's delivered. But there's a lot of great information. He's certainly one of the people that I think started that trend for calling out bro science people, deservedly so. There's a difference between experience and bro science, and there's some pretty bad information that had been circulating and still circulates. But I anticipated that with that platform, Lane's and others, that people who said stupid shit on the internet were going to get called out quickly. And I myself have stepped on a few landmines over the years, and yeah, believe
no
it
one
or
said
not.
shit. No one said diplomatic immunity. It's like Lethal Weapon 2. No one's fucking. I would love Lane or anyone. I mean, I definitely have a lot of respect for what Lane does, but that'll be on the list of the last thing someone does in their life. It's like, how you're someone sitting in heaven with a black eye going, what happened? Like, I called out Stan Efferding on the internet. I was like, now you're dead. That
I've had a couple, and they were deserved. Maybe there was some nuance missed. Maybe it was a clip that was edited that didn't. And that happens as well. People watch a 30-second internet clip, but don't bother to watch the whole interview and can't see the particular context of the discussion. So. And it's tiresome to try and engage in those debates because sometimes, as I've heard, I think Alan Flanagan referred to it as playing chess with pigeons, that, they'll fly in and knock all the pieces off the board and crap all over the place and then fly away thinking they won the argument, but have no real knowledge of the science. And it's all emotional and personal, as Lane has said. Data over feelings. And so I experienced that. I've had a lot of videos posted from a lot of popular podcasts that I just look at the comments and I just shake my head at or I'll post a video of, say, a 30-second video of John Jones and I training together. And suddenly everybody knows our entire training program, not the other 17 workouts that were done that week, from cardio to strength to speed to skill, and then have a full opinion as to what he should do, and as though they were the arbiter of truth.
And I find the more skilled the athlete, like what makes a skilled athlete is their adaptability. So really, throwing things at them to adapt is like the ultimate, because there are places where sports science are going to be the pinnacle of what makes or breaks an athlete, whether it's winning or losing. He's the greatest fighter of all time.
Yeah.
Right? The comment section is not going to make this guy any
You're
better.
concerned about his calves or with the lack thereof of a six-pack in his last fight. It's like he dismantled the guy in 90 seconds. He's not a bodybuilder. I could give two shits about his six-pack. And what's interesting, I don't want to get too far off on John Jones, but these are conversations I've actually had with him and his team some years ago when everybody was talking about, his body fat percentage or what have you. John wanted to be 250. And John's not going to have a six-pack at 250. It's not within him. It's just not his genetic predisposition. He's got a bit of a lordosis. He tends to carry most of his weight in his front belly, not in his arms or legs. But I said, look, who had the best? Because I look at it performance. I just wanted to win the fight. And so I'm measuring things like speed, strength, skill. We're actually trying to put some metrics onto things like broad jumps or just kind of looking at his cardiovascular fitness and heart rate recovery. And those are the kind of things that are important to me. And so everybody was kind of having a conversation about a six-pack. And this was amongst, Jackson Wink and the rest of the coaches. And I said, look, who has the best cardio in the heavyweight UFC ever in history? Immediately, like half of them in unison, Cain Velasquez. And I'm like, do you see a six-pack on Cain Velasquez? And it's just silence in the room. I'm like, okay, let's move on. Let's talk about fighting. So those are some of the things that even behind the scenes that you have to address as a strength and conditioning coach or nutritionist. It's not just the general public.
You mentioned Lane, and it was actually something not specifically I wanted to talk about him, but I'm a believer of the quote, an antidote to a bad idea is a better idea.
Yeah.
And I don't know how I feel about pillorying people in the town square, especially with an audience that likely probably already thinks the way you think, right? If you're following someone, if it's hard to sway people's judgment, especially it's even harder to do it in 60 seconds or less. With you having a finger on the pulse of the applied science, right? Like Pat Davidson, who we both know, he talks about training as like a trade, where you should go under like a master craftsman, and it should be something where you have like, I need 1,000 hours, or like an electrician or plumber or something like that. Do you ever find yourself, has there ever been like, I want to go into their drafts on Instagram, and you just have like some academic's face up, and you're like, well, actually in real life, and you just have a whole diatribe because you seem very like docile, non-combative. Like there must be things that you see that you're like, you guys have no idea how it works, and you're just kind of like, hey man, everything's all good.
Yeah, I think about it from both sides. One, the people who aren't academically proficient and they make claims that are generally emotional or what would you say, conspiratorial. Those folks, I just have to dismiss at hand because they just don't have the knowledge base to have that discussion with, or debate, or whatever you call it. The academics, and look, I never claimed to be the smartest guy. I'm a kind of a blue-collar bodybuilder myself, and so I've attended a lot of seminars with a lot of what I consider to be very, very smart people, a lot smarter than me. Barbell medicine, of course. I came down and saw your seminar with you and Pat Davidson in Florida, and I got to be honest with you, I sit there and I'm just lost. The level of knowledge that you guys possess. I was just sitting there with my pencil sometimes, like I'm not even gonna write that down because I don't understand it, and I'm just looking for things that I can use and apply. I'm not looking to be, an instructor, as you guys have been and are. I'm trying to share things that are more simple. On the flip side of that, like you said, with respect to, say, an academic saying, oh, I would do this or I would do that, if you haven't been behind the scenes, I mentioned John Joe's camp, but I've been behind the scenes with a lot of professional athletes, and Henry Cejudo, and the list goes on and on. Hofthor, Brian Shaw, I'm working with Mitchell Hooper currently, and the U.S. Olympic women's wrestling team. It's interesting that you can write up the world's best program that all the PhDs would sit down and agree. NSCA would check that off as perfect. But implementing that program and understanding that there's a limitation to what your athlete will do or is capable of doing, or just when I say capable, meaning whether it's a time constraint or travel constraint or just maybe they don't want to. That's where the rubber meets the road. I say it's 1% information, 99% execution. I've always said compliance is the science. And my head's just spinning with examples right now that I can think of in my head of times at which I wanted to introduce a particular program to a team or to an individual athlete, and you could see that the hurdles were such that you would have to baby step that to get there. I mentioned U.S. Olympic women's wrestling team. Kennedy Blades is a fantastic, phenomenal young world champion wrestler who was, as a teenager, was on the U.S. Olympic junior Olympic team. I sent her a diet, I mapped it all out. I went down to Arizona and I bought her a grill, one of those Ninja grills, and showed her what foods to buy at Costco and how to cook them, because to me, again, execution, right? The information's pretty easy, but execution, I want to make sure she could comply with the program. And flew back to Las Vegas, and I said, send me pictures of all your meals. And the very next morning, I get a picture of a bagel with cream cheese and a Chobani. That afternoon, I got 2 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And that's probably not anywhere close to the program that I actually designed for her, but that's the reality of a college student with 2-a-day wrestling practices and all the demands and back and forth. And that, it goes way back with me to when I was training University of Oregon football and track athletes back in the early 90s, who would eat at McDonald's quite regularly just to get enough calories. When I would take a recruit up to UW, a quarterback, and the strength and conditioning coach would say, oh, God, Stan, please don't listen to my presentation this morning, because he was going to tell the athletes, look, you need to get enough food. You're going to be doing 2-a-days, and I can't have you losing weight. And he goes, if you got to stuff peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in your backpack, then that's what you do. Understanding that calories are king. And so I, as someone who gives people nutrition advice, I've got my perfect, but don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. What in reality happens is what I did in college, when you'd go to the mess hall in the morning and you'd take a bunch of food and put it into Ziploc baggies or Tupperware, and you'd have to hide it in your bag because you weren't supposed to take the food. And then you would sit in the back of your class open up your Tupperware 4 hours later with warm eggs and chicken, and the 10 rows in front of you would be like, what the fuck is that smell? And you would be sitting there, my backpack didn't have books in it, it had food in it, all throughout, my younger years in college as a teenager. So that's now what I experience with my athletes, is that they're not always able to comply, especially when traveling. Kennedy, again, recently flew overseas, and she didn't take her meals with her. And that was one of the advices that I gave her and her coaches at University of Arizona, where they train. I said they need to take their meals internationally, because how many times have you seen people land and try and eat the local foods and end up getting some sort of bug? And sure enough, she ended up getting sick, had diarrhea, and was vomiting, and lost like 7 pounds, and ended up only getting a bronze when she was a shoe-in for the gold. But those kinds of things seem so simple to us, and that's the execution, and that's not as the academics would design. It's what can you actually get them to consistently do.
I mean, you have to make concessions for inconveniences or lack of adherence or lack of compliance, but how often do you find yourself having to find or make concessions for preference? Like, hey, I really like X, Y, or Z, and I'm going to just hire the guy who says we'll find a way to work around. Like, I'm going to eat fucking Jimmy John's or whatever. Like, do you find yourself running into that at the levels that you're coaching now?
A lot. And oftentimes with some professional athletes, I'll actually find out what restaurants they like to eat at, and I'll pull the menu down, even if it's at McDonald's, and try and find out what's the least worst option that they can eat when they go to those places. High school kids, same thing. They travel quite a bit to play sports, on the weekends, etc. And they're going to go to Wendy's, or they're going to go to a fast food place. And you make choices like, when you go to Subway, is it the meatball sandwich or is it steak and chicken? And those are pretty easy choices for us, but you have to let the athlete know that, hey, this is probably preferable, higher in protein, lower in fat. Don't drink the soda, try and get a milk or an orange juice or something. Little things like that. And it's not ideal. Sometimes I bristle saying it, but the outcome's more important. Are they getting sufficient calories? Are they getting sufficient protein? Are they getting their 4 evenly spaced meals a day? Those become the priority, independent of the food quality. And I even with the general public, and I said this on Tom Bilyeu's podcast some time ago, and they took a clip of it and put it on social media. I said that even the McDonald's diet, I said 95% of health benefits are realized simply from weight loss itself, irrespective of diet. And I included the McDonald's diet, and there's the 7-Eleven diet, and there's the Twinkie diet, and we're aware that in a calorie deficit, you can lose weight, and all of your blood markers will improve. Well, that got posted on social media, and it just went viral, and people lost their shit. And of course, they clipped out the part where I said I would never recommend a McDonald's diet. They left in all the meat. And those are the kind of the decisions that you have to make, whether it's with an athlete or somebody in the general public. And your question was, do you have to, change things based on their personal preference? And the answer is absolutely. That's what the initial questionnaire is. What kinds of foods do you like to eat? Where do you like to eat? When do you like to eat? And you have to design the program for compliance first and foremost.
You seem to make all your decisions based off of an objective performance outcome, right? Whether it's like, we don't need a 6-pack if John's going to beat the shit out of someone in 90 seconds, right? Like, we need to the what do you call it? The least best or the best worst option.
Yeah, something
now,
like that.
When you're looking at performance as the proxy by which you make decisions, how do you wrestle with the emerging, or maybe it doesn't even cross your radar? How do you interpret the emerging health advice that's coming out purely not based off performance, but having the focal point of longevity and health? Like, there's always the argument, like, is is peak performance healthy? It's like, well, is it healthy to fight in the UFC and get potentially your head kicked in? It's like, well, probably not. Is there a healthy way to do it? Yes, but the market now seems to be, the talking heads of the industry are very much health, which I think should be always be in the conversation, but longevity now is like the buzzword of the last couple of years.
Yeah, in my we're here at the Swiss conference in Columbus, and in my presentation today, I'm going to talk about the difference between health and fitness. Health being the absence of illness or injury. Show me somebody who's never been injured, I'll show you somebody who's never won anything. Fitness being the ability to perform a particular duty or task. And the fitness level, as you said, required to be a UFC champion or a world's strongest man, or even a 14-year-old gymnast in the Olympics is not healthy. And their exposure to injury, and even potential long-term problems, blood pressure, metabolic syndrome, etc. And so a lot of what I do is just try and mitigate damage for those folks while they're competing, which I found can help them with their performance. And they may historically have felt as though they needed to make these sacrifices in order to perform better, but I try and educate them that, no, if we do it this way, you can achieve the same end, but not potentially have the long-term deleterious health effects. And you're right. Then there's a lot of general population nutrition advice that doesn't necessarily apply to athletes. Whether or not it's good advice even for the general population is what is currently being debated on social media with the longevity industry in particular, as you mentioned. To be specific, protein intake. And just to say on the outset, I don't utilize general population nutrition information or longevity information as a reference or resource. I utilize the ISSN, the International Society of Sports Nutrition, and their positions on things like meal timing and protein intake, et cetera, et cetera. So if an individual watching wants to reference the resources that I consider to be reputable and applicable to athletes, those are the ones that that's where I would direct them. Just the Journal of International Society of Sports Nutrition, they have position papers on all of that stuff. But what we've seen come out of the longevity industry, we can just touch on a few topics, as this is always a fun dive, because I think longevity folks are crazier than the bodybuilders. I mean, talk about experimenting with things that at least steroids work.
Yes.
And we understand that, yes,
so good.
And we know the side effects, and it's a clear path. We've had lots of research on that for many, many years. The stuff that these folks have been diving into is just purely experimental. And I've seen some really smart folks. I hate it when people, what do you refer to it as, appeal to authority, will reference one of these folks based on their academic achievements, Harvard or their UCLA, and much respect to them for that. But oftentimes they're making claims that are outside of their domain-specific expertise, nutrition claims in particular. Most of these Harvard folks that are making nutrition claims aren't nutritionists. So I look at PhDs in nutrition for that information. So specifically protein is kind of the biggest one. And we've seen that come out of David Sinclair, Walter Longo, those camps about mTOR stimulation and how that might be actually detrimental to longevity. But they have no evidence of that. They use their mouse research to show that. The primate research is equivocal, and they have no human evidence to show that protein restriction. And quite the contrary, there are PhDs in nutrition who would suggest that because that's an acute stimulus and not a chronic stimulus, that is actually a positive thing, the protein response, particularly as we age. We've got sarcopenia, we've got anabolic resistance that occurs in elderly populations. And increasing protein intake is pretty critical for those folks. They don't experience the same muscle protein synthesis from smaller doses of protein that a younger athlete would. And so they need more protein just to stimulate that and to retain their lean body mass. In addition, of course, to the training stimulus, and I think everybody's pretty much in agreement now that lifting weights is a priority. If you were going to choose, and had to choose, although I don't think it's a dichotomy, between lifting or cardio, that seems like the tables have turned now into where weightlifting is probably the more essential, although cardio should be certainly included. So protein's the big one. Dr. Gabrielle Lyons has been fighting quite aggressively for a number of years to get people to recognize the importance of what her and Donald Lehman have referred to as muscle-centric medicine. It's a fantastic message. We're just fortunate to love lifting weights, and I never thought about this when I was a teenager. The muscle-centric medicine and sarcopenia. I just wanted to be jacked, and just by luck of the draw, I landed on a passion that is also great for longevity. The competitive aspect notwithstanding. So we focus on lean body mass and those folks who are proclaiming that protein is, I guess it's kind of dose dependent, but they're really into chronic calorie restriction because they see how it helps with longevity for mice. It doesn't bode well for human populations. We aren't mice. And especially as we age. And so that's kind of some of the biggest information that's coming out of the longevity industry. And then from there, it's all of these supplements that are unproven.
I find the resistance training longevity crowd to even still miss the boat. Because I don't know. There's no such thing as bad ideas, just bad incentives. I think that's a Sam Harris quote that I really like. And I feel like the longevity industry has as bad an incentive as the Shreds marketing people. They just wanted to make a bunch of money, right? I think I will always revert back to the biggest guy in the room for advice because I think his incentives are he wants people to get big. And I think that's big or strong or fast or athletic or however you want to measure it. I think the intentions always matter. So the intentions from the big guy at the gym or the shredded guy or the fast guy at the track are always, maybe more aligned with the desired outcome than the intentions of these fringe markets that kind of swing in pendulum. Because resistance training is more in vogue than it's ever been. And I think no one would argue that. But what I'm seeing come out of the longevity camp, these fitness boomers that are 140 pounds talking about ruck marching as resistance training or doing curtsy lunges with a 2.5 pound plate. This must boil your blood. You are one of the strongest people, even to I would say even, but to this day, still one of the strongest people on the planet. It's my time for my weekly workout, 600 pound squat, 600 pound deadlift. And it's do you think that the longevity space is a net positive or negative? Even on the desired outcome that they're after, let alone on the industry at large.
Even the people I just mentioned, Sinclair and Walter Longo, they acknowledge the big rocks. The big rocks are 7+ hours of sleep, high quality sleep, a healthy diet, which that opens up a lot of different variations there, and regular exercise. And that exercise now, all of them recommend, including cardiovascular and resistance training. So in so much as those are the messages, and we understand that we have 70% overweight and obese, we have 40% of the population with prediabetes or diabetes. Going back many years, I said, what's the best exercise? The one you'll do. And if that's the gap that you need to bridge, then you want to meet the individual where they're at. If we're talking to 70% of the population who's largely sedentary and overweight, then I think any message of exercise, whether it's rucking or it's battle ropes and burpees, which I despise, which we can talk about later, any method of exercise, hopefully it's something they enjoy, which is kind of the most important thing I lead with, is what do you like doing? My wife has recently challenged all of our neighbors to pickleball tournaments in our driveway, and so at least everybody's out exercising, right?
I'd move.
Yes.
I'd move. No, I'm a new neighborhood.
Yeah. So, matter of fact, I woke up this morning with some knee soreness. It's like you say, I can go squat 600 pounds. I have no knee soreness. I play some pickleball, and I discover that whole change of direction thing for old people is not a great idea. And I woke up the next morning all sore. But the point being, it was enjoyable. Everybody was out there. All the neighbors were running and playing and sweating, and they were all purple in the face and breathing hard. And that's probably better than nothing. And that's kind of oftentimes where I have to meet people. I recently had a video go viral about talking about aspartame and just artificial sweeteners in general. And I talked about the fact that when you replace sugar-sweetened beverages with diet sodas, you consistently see weight loss. And people started screaming and yelling about all the bad things about aspartame. And I'm like, as compared to what? At what dose, of course, when you're talking toxicity. But As compared to what? As compared to a sedentary individual who's 30, 40, 50 pounds overweight, drinking sugar-laden beverages. And they'll talk about, well, there's cancer, and even the worst animal research on that shows a cancer increase of maybe 1%, whereas you've got a 200 to 300% increase in cancer risk with obesity. So I'm saying as compared to what, and so, my goal would be to get people to exercise and to find the exercise that they enjoy. I don't say we, you as an, academically credentialed professional.
You'll take a we with me and you any day. Anything that puts me in the same conversation as Stan Efferding, like I'm here for it.
Yeah, who try and optimize performance would suggest there's better options. I just recently talked about how stretching did not improve performance, did not decrease DOMs, could actually inhibit performance. And the stretching people, I didn't realize there was a stretching religion full of prophets and disciples, and they just descended upon me and attacked me for mentioning that. But as compared to what? Lifting through a full range of motion gives you the same mobility as static stretching. And any type of movement is better than stretching for DOMS recovery. So I was just pointing out that when you're looking at the 1%, when you're trying to optimize a program and you've got limited time and limited physical capital, we're choosing the best, right? We're not going down the list. But having said that, if somebody, if yoga is something that somebody enjoys and that gets them some exercise, and yoga in particular provides some loading, whereas static stretching may not, probably even more preferential than stretching because it's still exercise. The difference is we focus on training. Is it measurable and progressible, or is it just exercise? Nothing wrong with that for the general population, but I think the nature of the conversation is that there is a spectrum upon which we make these decisions and for whom.
You've kind of brought mainstream the health benefits from the hardcore, right? Like bodybuilder, powerlifter, crazy physique, crazy strength, and brought that to a general market. Right? You look at almost all the success stories, not almost all, but a large number of the success stories coming out of like the vertical diet are people who don't have a powerlifting or bodybuilding background, who have more of a general health focus and have made decisions that have kind of led them off path, and the vertical diet's kind of given them this very easy to execute framework to help improve their health. We're having issues with kind of the brother in arms, health issues now in the bodybuilding and powerlifting community. Can you speak on, I think we've lost 2 in the last 2 weeks, professional bodybuilders. Like how is it now that like, okay, yes, the general population has their health concerns. I mean, we're both partnered with Marek Health. We talk about the benefits of, getting routine blood labs done and the services through, consulting on nutrition and diet and exercise and sleep and all that. That reaches the mass market. But our house isn't in order. Like, how often do you find yourself advising or intervening on some of like, the practices in the bodybuilding community that kind of, brought you up?
Yeah. I don't present myself as the pillar of fitness. I mean, I obviously pushed my body throughout my career well beyond what would be considered to be healthy. So I come more as a person who from experience, having had over 100 blood tests throughout my career and seen what happens when I had metabolic syndrome, when I was north of 300 pounds, and how I tried to address those things. And even with the chronic dieting, particularly in female athletes with the female triad. So I've seen both ends of the spectrum. Been competing since 1988. I bulked up to over 300 pounds many times to compete in powerlifting, and I've dieted down to single-digit body fat to compete as an IFBB pro bodybuilder. I've gained and lost conservatively well over 1,000 pounds throughout my career. Conservatively, gaining 30, 40, 50, losing 30, 40, 50, back and forth. Without getting too far on to the details on that, I learned a lot of lessons along the way and had to consult with a lot of professionals along the way, whether it was medical professionals, endocrinologists, and with the blood testing, et cetera, to try and mitigate some of those problems. And so I come as somebody with experience. I don't proclaim that folks should follow my path, quite the opposite. But I will consult those who are trying to follow my path, and that's their choice, hell or high water. I spoke about this previously, that you ask an Olympic athlete, if they could take a drug or something and it would get them a gold medal, but they might, die 5 years later. A lot of them would take it. And I understand that mindset. And so, again, as we spoke about previously, if I can get in there and show them that, yes, you can push your body pretty damn hard, maybe not all year round every year, which is kind of why I like to periodize body weight the same way somebody would periodize their strength training, right? Get my heavy athletes to come down at least once a year. If they want to go back up, then we manage that. But I don't proclaim myself to be have the kind of like even now. I'm obviously I'm down from 300 to under 240. And I maintain good health. I constantly check my blood pressure. I show my blood work and stuff to my audience, and those things are still important to me. But I don't think 240 is a good number for a 56-year-old. It's just where I prefer to be at. I still like lifting really, really heavy, and people always question the sensibility in that, whether or not I'm potentially exposing myself to injury, arthritis or joint injury, etc. I kind of have an opposite feeling in terms of effective or responsibly managing load over time to provide kind of the hormetic effect to actually make your joints stronger. It just based on how much and how often do you lift, and do you progress that over time, and to decline as slowly as possible, which is the message of the longevity industry. To acquire cardiovascular disease at the slowest rate possible. Not that it'll never happen, but the eventuality is always there. You'll die of something, but to postpone that as long as possible. So, not even sure if I remember the original question, but I just didn't want to make folks think that my path is the best path. But a lot of the things that I've experienced and the things that the vertical diet attempts to do is to help them make smarter decisions about their health and longevity.
When you look at the competition space right now and the health issues and the mortality issues that bodybuilding are having, I wasn't around. I don't know the statistics, but we know people who have passed away from practices associated with bodybuilding throughout the history of bodybuilding from the beginning. Like, we can go all the way back to Nasser and that era. Now, mind you, there was much less competitive bodybuilders and still had health issues, but it seems like there must have been a shift in practice where modern day competitors are doing something different that's increasing their risk. Do you have an opinion on what that is? It overall toxic load? Is it just not being diligent? Is it liver? Is it kidney? Is it diuretic? Like, what do you think is different about today's era bodybuilding that's making it so dangerous?
Well, it's all the above. Historically, it was diuretics. It was knocking people off and causing kidney disease. Greg Nuckols did a review of a study that was performed, and I can't remember the name of the person who did it, but they actually looked at bodybuilder deaths as in terms of general population and found that it wasn't any higher as a percentage. Unfortunately, that's not a very high bar, because the general population has, again, 70% overweight and obese and 40% pre or diabetic. And obviously, that's not a great comparison for a group of people who are supposed to be, pursuing health to some degree. You hit on the big reasons. The big reasons are unmanaged blood pressure. We have another coach in the hospital just this very weekend with kidney failure. Tad, the diet coach, he's publicly on his social media, Instagram, talked about in the last, 2 days ago, ended up getting hospitalized, and acknowledged that it was unmanaged high blood pressure. He's trying to send a responsible message. I've been talking about that for years. To me, I have the high blood pressure quick fix kit, and I've done rants, and I can't talk enough about high blood pressure and how it just kills. I mean, that is probably the single most, and along with brain damage, Alzheimer's, blood pressure for the kidneys, for endothelial function, increasing your exposure to cardiovascular disease risk by damaging the endothelial lining. Blood pressure is the number one. Blood thickness, of course, is going to also lead to that. Hemoglobin, hematocrit, RBCs, which is common with even TRT, and in the big doses of testosterone. Most of the people who have passed away had either a prior or pre-existing condition that they were aware of and they continued to push the envelope. Were off-season, overweight, not using a CPAP. I know a lot of these people personally, and I know that they had apnea, and I know they weren't consistently using their CPAP, which is a huge contributor to high blood pressure and high blood thickness. And so I think and carried too much weight for too long, too late in their career. A lot of these people were in their 40s, which is obviously very young, but in terms of bodybuilding years, that's a significant age to still be carrying 280, 290 plus pounds, based on height and the like. And so I think that those are the kind of the primary drivers. If I wanted somebody to pay attention to anything, I want them to get their blood pressure checked and to get on blood pressure medication if necessary, or use, a CPAP, weight loss. There's a whole list of items that I put forth in my high blood pressure quick fix kit that they can remedy, and then to get a blood test. Hence Marek Health. I've been getting blood tests done since I was 20 years old. When I was first diagnosed hypogonadal with varicocele, and that's when I started TRT shortly thereafter as a 20-year-old who had low T, somewhere in the 40s or 60s or something like that as a young man. So I had delayed onset puberty as a result. I was 115 pounds as a senior in high school, so I was really undersized. And so I think blood tests are important at any age. I was working with a softball team last summer, a high school girls softball team last summer. Two of the girls had a significant decline in performance. We measure their 40s about once a month to see. And I asked the parents, I said, what's going on? She said, oh, she's been really tired lately. And I said, get a blood test. To get a blood test, she's got anemia. Between menstruation and avoiding red meat, which is common now amongst teenagers to demonize particular foods, egg yolks, dairy, fruit, all of those things are bad now. They end up with the female triad, chronic calorie restriction, amenorrhea, cessation of the menstrual period, and anemia, sometimes hypothyroidism and hair loss and vitamin B12 deficiency. Very common amongst athletes, especially endurance athletes and high school girls. And so a blood test was able to determine at even that early of an age. I wish I had the blood test when I was 16, or then I could have found out sooner. Maybe there had been an intervention. Maybe I could have had a surgery for the varicocele and then had normal production. All of those things are things that you can see from a blood test that I think is important for everybody to at least get a baseline. But I think that covers the reason why we're seeing such a high number of deaths, along with the competitive nature and then financial incentives, of course, which we've always seen in sports. Now with social media actually providing you a platform under which you can monetize your physical fitness, again, not health. We're starting to see more and more people get exposed to potential life-threatening problems.
You said 7 years ago you saw the writing on the wall with the academic wave, the reemergence of the digital, like Dr. Oz, right? Like Huberman is Oz, right?
Yeah.
Or if we all agree that Rogan is Oprah, the Huberman is Oz. Like right. And it's sunshine up my balls. Like fuck, I don't got time, man. Like I got to work. What's the next 7 years look like? The prophet, you are the oracle now. You are all knowing and all seeing. Well, what do you think? What do you see in the next 7 years? Health, fitness, longevity space. What does this look like? What's coming?
Well, someone commented on one of my YouTube videos many years ago. It's been like 4 or 5 years ago. Because I'm on YouTube a lot. I'm on a lot of podcasts. I'm talking to a lot of people, and they said Stan just repeats himself. And you could look at that as an insult. I kind of looked at it as a compliment, because I'm not making shit up. I'm focused on the things that actually work, and I just repeat those things over and over and over again. Everybody kind of knows what works. It's not like obese people don't know that hyperpalatable, ultra-processed fast foods or an overconsumption of calories is causing them to be overweight. But I said, are you doing it? Now, you know all of these things. Are you doing it? Are you getting your 7+ hours of sleep? Are you exercising regularly? All of these things. Are you eating healthy? Are you getting a blood test to see how your genetic predisposition is to how you respond to, your diet, etc.? So I think the information is there. I think even the popular people are evolving. You just mentioned Huberman. Huberman's made a lot of extraordinary claims. Unfortunately, a lot of it is majoring in the minors. But that's what people want. That's what I wanted throughout my whole career. I was searching around for the magic. I was turning every rock. I went and met up with Flex Wheeler finally after all these many years of following him since the early 90s. In 2008, I sat down with him at Gold's Gym in Venice with my yellow pad of paper and my pencil, and finally the Wizard of Oz was going to pull back the curtain, and I was going to get to see exactly how to become a pro bodybuilder. Flex talked and asked questions, and about an hour and a half later, I looked down and I had nothing written on my paper. Flex hadn't told me anything I didn't already know, anything I don't think the general public doesn't already know, anything an athlete doesn't already know. He just emphasized the things that he was going to have me do that mattered most, and to make sure that we did them just religiously, from sleeping to eating to training, and just the big rocks. So I don't think I have anything extraordinary to tell people about that, and I don't think after looking at everything that's going out there that anybody has anything new. Huberman's evolved. Dr. Peter Attia is another one who has evolved over the years, believe it or not. These are people who 5, 6, 7 years ago, believed in keto independent of a calorie deficit. They believed in intermittent fasting independent of a calorie deficit for its health benefits, right? Independent of weight loss and a calorie deficit. These are folks who were, especially like Dr. Peter Attia, who was a keto, intermittent fasting, and he's obsessive. So I had to watch this for 3 years or 4 years of him peeing on keto sticks and showing everybody his keto numbers. But what happens, and with Huberman as well, Huberman is great with mechanisms. Who's another one? Dr. Rhonda Patrick, great with biochemistry, great with mechanisms of action, but they all make the same mistake. They make these giant logical leaps into outcomes, into claims and percentage, 300% increase in this, that, and the other. Rhonda Patrick famously on Joe Rogan had said that fasting would increase your growth hormone so then you could build muscle.
Shut up. She did not say that.
She did say that. And a lot of these people still make that claim. I was talking about how chrononutrition and how eating breakfast was probably a better option for people who chose to intermittent fast. It's not my recommendation, but my recommendation is what's the best diet, the one you'll follow. And if keto or intermittent fasting, and I'm trying to shit on those diets in so much as it allows the individual to adhere to the diet and makes it seem the least restrictive, such that they can maintain a calorie deficit and experience the weight loss. Again, the weight loss being the primary importance. Long-term adherence, of course, is critical to that as well. But back to my point, without shitting on diets or shitting on Huberman or Rhonda Patrick, these are all very smart people. I mean, Peter Attia, he's talking about a Stanford MD and a Johns Hopkins oncologist. He used to believe in the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity. That's Jason Fung. That's who else was
Does it bother
good
you
calories
that these are
or
strong
bad
opinions
calories?
so weakly held?
Well, again, outside of their domain-specific knowledge, they're not nutritionists. There were journalists writing these books, not nutritionists writing these books. Gary Taubes, smart guy, very academically qualified, not a nutritionist, writing a book about keto with. Fortunately, we now have redpenreviews.org, where we have there's a host of PhDs in nutrition that go through and they look at all the references. Gary Taubes' book is excellently referenced, but the references don't say the claims he made in the book, and that's why when an organization like Red Pen Reviews goes through and looks at the references to see and whether or not that reference represents the body of evidence. I said many years ago in one of my rants, I said that there's peer-reviewed published research to support any side of an argument. And that is true, but that doesn't necessarily make them equivocal, because we have a hierarchy of evidence. And we know some of that research is animal research or Petri dish studies. And some of that research is randomized controlled trials. Some of it's epidemiology. Some of it is a systematic reviews, a meta-analyses of all the body of literature. And then that, as we get up the pyramid to the very top, we see position stands by professionals, academically qualified professionals who have reviewed the body of research and put forth a consensus. And so, we have this hierarchy of evidence, but most people are down here with anecdotes, testimonials, appeals to authority, and then, of course, the mouse studies. But what has happened, and I'm bringing this all around, I wasn't trying to shit on Dr. Peter Attia or Huberman. They have made some extraordinary claims on outcomes that just aren't proven in humans. And I, as a bodybuilder and a powerlifter, I'm only interested in outcomes. So I'm on the other end of that spectrum. And if I try it and it doesn't make me stronger or increase my performance in some measurable, immediate sense, then I've moved on. And so, and if it's made me weaker, I even have a slide today, things that make you weak. There's a host of things that people have utilized over the years that actually cause a decline in performance. So the silver lining, what you mentioned 7 years ago when I saw Lane Norton, and I anticipated that I didn't want to be on Fuckery Friday. Even Joe Rogan, by having these experts on their show, eventually they have started to have people like Lane Norton, Dr. Andy Galpin, and others on their show explaining the science to them, and it's caused them to question what they used to believe, and they have started to evolve. And I see that in some of their more recent podcasts over the last year or so. They still get into the sunbathing your balls and the ice baths as though it's something meaningful. It's not. It's majoring in the minors. And there are time constraints and cost constraints to be considered, and what do we call that? When you're trying to choose, you only have time to choose one of two options, and you want to the cost-benefit analysis on anything. There's only so many hours in a day, and I listened to some influencer the other day said he got up at like 4 o'clock in the morning and he had like 17 little wristlets on or something. I don't know if you recognize the guy, but he had this whole thing that he would do every morning. He got up and I can't even explain it, but I'm like, Jesus Christ, that's complicated. If I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, it's to pee and go back to bed. It's not to engage in all of these particular, minor of little things that move the needle very little. I focus on the big rocks over and over and over again. So I have seen an evolution. I like it when I see some of these, not just academically qualified professionals, but academically qualified professionals who are also competing, who lift weights, compete in bodybuilding or powerlifting or some sport, and understand the application of their academia into outcome, human outcome and performance. And so there has been an evolution. Now, the original question was, what do I see in the next 7 years? I see a lot of the same, which is frustrating because, again, it's 1% information, 99% execution. But what I see is that I spend the vast majority of my time dispelling myths, trying to get people back on track from, I call it the shiny object syndrome, and it happens amongst professional athletes as well. Many of them doing things that some of them are successful in spite of themselves, to be honest. And if it's not hurting them necessarily, I leave it in the placebo category. I'm like, if that's your routine and that's what you enjoy, I'll leave it alone unless I can recognize that it's actually physically harming them or potentially impeding their performance, in which case I'll intervene and try and educate them as to the research. If it compromises their ability to spend more time and energy into something that gives them a greater return on their investment, such as a training protocol, etc., then I'll suggest we do the better of the two options. That's always going to be the case with social media. We're always going to have people that are going to be making extraordinary claims and trying to financially benefit off of it. But I think where the future should head is kind of where some of, like Alan Flanagan in particular, and is talking a lot about the real, and this conversation always ends up with a lot of hand-wringing by people and comments. But if it's about the general population, the 70% of the population, and weight loss, we're back to the source or the cause of the obesity epidemic and the increased rates of disease is overconsumption of calories, period. We're just eating more than we used to eat, and more than some other societies that don't have the same obesity problem. And those calories are largely coming from these ultra-processed, hyper-palatable foods. that is, because I said in a video many years ago on the obesity epidemic, is everybody's trying to play pin the tail of the donkey and find if you want to start a war, you need to find an enemy. And unfortunately, in the war on obesity, you're at war with yourself. The enemy is also the victim. The source of the problem is also the only solution. So it might not be your fault, but it's your responsibility. Having said that, if you want to do something on a large scale, oh my God, I'm going to get killed on this because it just made me think of another very effective obesity intervention that's currently available, which is the semaglutide. The GLP-1 agonists and the GIP agonists, tirzepatide and Ozempic and those, incredibly effective for weight loss. Now, I'm not saying anything about the fact that medications will have side effects for some people to varying degrees. Wherever you weigh in on that, you have to recognize that they're extraordinarily effective. Long-term dietary adherence, weight loss over a 2-year period is about 2% of your body weight. That's on average. The vast majority of people will have more or less. There's individual variability in every study, and you'll see some people lose a significant amount of weight and people who gain more weight. Over a 2-year study, just 2% average weight loss, as compared to the semaglutide was 18%, and now tirzepatide is as high as 23%. That's only eclipsed by bariatric surgery in terms of its effectiveness for weight loss. And I use the word effectiveness somewhat loosely because, again, now you've got potential for side effects, nausea, and potentially, I think that they slow down digestion. And some people have experienced digestion slowing to the point where it stopped. And that can obviously cause some problems. There are some reports, but with millions of people using these, the side effects are very minor in comparison to the benefits that have been realized by people who have lost a significant amount of weight. Remembering, again, 95% of health benefits realized simply from weight loss itself. Blood pressure reduction, type 2 diabetes reversal, cardiovascular disease improvement, all of those things. So that is that's the current most effective intervention, not perfect, for the obesity epidemic. The next one is going to have to be on a greater scale with how do we intervene with some of these food choices that people make. How do we as we did with smoking, let's say, how do we start to address the source of the problem at the supplier? And this is where people start freaking out because that's government intervention, right? And government fucks everything up. So I can say that we need to do something about the ultra-processed food providers to better manage the amount of calories that people have access to these ultra-processed foods. And at the same time say that a government intervention might not be a solution because they'll mess the whole thing up. They'll turn it into a big bureaucracy where they collect a bunch of money. There'll be no resolution. The current problem is that those people, the ultra-processed food companies are putting tons of money lobbying into politics, and so it's kind of a good old boys network. But that is the problem. We're over-consuming food. Those foods are ultra-processed, highly palatable foods, and that becomes more of a public policy, potentially a public policy intervention if we want to make a significant impact, as we did with smoking, in reducing obesity and death rates. That's the nut that hasn't been cracked yet, because sometimes you can cause a bigger problem trying to solve that, especially when the government gets involved. It becomes
Stan Efferding for president is was what I heard. Man,
well, I don't have a solution. Yeah. I'm just saying that's the problem.
I think we'll move towards a Stan singularity in the way that people process information between like experience and research and patient or clinical or athlete values. I think when it comes to evidence-based, it's hard pressed to find someone who carries weight in all three categories quite like you. I look forward to your talk later on today. I appreciate you giving up some of your time to us. Like I said, we both work alongside Marek Health, and you're a better living embodiment of it. So I'm glad they gave you the shirt. They're like, yeah, you just wear the baseball jersey, dude. You don't get a shirt. We really appreciate you taking the time to come on, and I hope it's not 7 years before we do this again. But we'll have to put it in the calendar to run it back in 7 years, and just the prophet Efferding, see what he has brought to light. But I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother. Thanks for having me on.